This is day 2 out of 3 of Kayden's form-focused advanced program. The first superset we're doing is a single dumbbell Romanian deadlift and superset that with a floor dumbbell press. So this is a front angle of what a Romanian deadlift looks like, and Kayden quickly turns to the side and shows you what a Romanian deadlift looks like from the side, which is more important for this type of exercise. You can see that he keeps his back straight, but he hinges at the hip. That means that he's not rounding his lower back and bending his lower back to get down. That would take all of the stress off of the hamstrings and put it all on the lower back, which is not what we want because that can lead to injury. So instead, he's keeping a straight back, and you'll see that the bar path, that we call it, in this case the dumbbell path, is pretty straight. It's going vertically down and all the way up. It's not going horizontally away from his body or too close to his body. He is just keeping it in a straight line. And that's what we want, because this exercise is about pushing the hips back and loading the glutes and hamstrings while maintaining a balanced and stable position. So you want to actually brace the abs and sit your butt back till you feel the stretch in the hamstring. Here's the second exercise, a single arm floor press. So here, Kayden is doing one arm at a time. And that's just so you can focus a little bit more on really squeezing and firing that muscle on that one side. The same reason is true for most single-sided exercises. Now what you're focusing on here is the chest, the triceps, and the shoulders in order to get that weight up. You also want to make sure that your shoulders are stabilized and not at risk of injury or just working the wrong muscles. So what we want to do is actually use your shoulder blades in order to stabilize them with the rotator cuff. So the way we do that is by kind of forcing your chest up and pinning your shoulder blades together so that they're kind of squeezing the spine. While you're doing that, you press upwards. This is the opposite of a push-up, where a push-up you actually want to move your shoulder blades as well as your arms. In this case, we want to pin your shoulder blades and just use the arms so that everything is stabilized. Again, we always use that first set as a warm-up. So whether you want to go heavier, you can on the second set coming up. Otherwise, you can stick to the same weight, and you'll notice that likely it'll be easier than the first one because you've warmed up that muscle group and that movement pattern is fresh in your head. Couple seconds to go. Back to the Romanian deadlift here. Give you a couple more cues this time. So again, we're not trying to focus on the lower back. If you feel your lower back, you're either doing something wrong or we have to fix something else that's going on there. It might be a weak core, something like that. However, I'm going to coach you through this as best as possible. It's all about the core and the hip positioning here. Same thing with the right muscles firing. So we want your abs braced hard. Pretend like someone's going to kick you right in the stomach. You're going to brace and don't let go of that brace throughout the whole rep. That's going to stabilize your spine so that your lower back and your abs are working together to keep your spine in a neutral position. And as you bend over, you're loading the hamstrings more and more until you feel a stretch in the hamstrings at the back of your leg. You're going to use that stretch to squeeze off and get your weight back up. Now we do have a slight pause here at the bottom as well. This is to prevent you from bouncing or using any momentum. At the same time, if you go too fast, it's easy for your lower back to take over, something we don't want. Back to the floor press. So here, Kayden is also doing this with a little more chest focus. So what you'll notice with a floor press is that his arms are completely sideways. They're flared out, and his elbows are closer in line with his shoulders than it is to being beside his torso. And this is going to work a little bit more chest. The other version that he's going to show you right here is bringing the elbows a little closer to the body and doing the same movement. Now the difference here is that it's a little bit easier on the shoulder joint. Some people experience impingement when they do fully chest focused, and this puts a bit less focus on the chest and a little bit more on the triceps. It's still pretty balanced overall. All right, the third and final set is coming up. You should be trying to catch your breath, even take a sip of water if you want. And here it shows that we're doing 12 to 15 reps. Same as we've been doing in the other two. 3, 2, 1, let's go. So you'll also notice here that Kayden has a slight bend in the knee, but he's not bending his knees too much. The focus is on the hips. If he bends his knee too much, it'll look like a squat. We're not trying to squat here. We're trying to focus on the posterior chain, the posterior side of the body, the back side, which is hamstrings, glutes. Lower back will still work, but as a stabilizer, working all those muscles. Very important also to not lean too far forward because then your lower back will take over as well. This is one of the best exercises to help build hamstring strength, prevent a lot of injuries as well, and at the same time, build a really nice tone on your hamstrings. A lot of people have very underdeveloped hamstrings, and when you develop your hamstrings, you notice the aesthetic look as well as all of the benefits that you get in terms of injury prevention and performance. All right, and this is the last set of the unilateral, meaning single-sided, versus bilateral, which is both sides at the same time. So this is unilateral floor press with the dumbbell in the more chest-focused manner. Again, if you feel any sort of impingement, make sure that you're forcing your chest up and pinning your shoulder blades back while you do this. That's going to put your shoulder in a more stable position, less likely to be impinged. And B, also try lowering your angle of your arm right there like Kayden just did. And that moves the muscles around the shoulder in a bit of a different way, less likely to have any sort of impingement on the nerve. All right, so you guys are done with that first set of superset exercises. Next up is a superset of sumo dumbbell deadlifts and dumbbell shoulder press. The shoulder press is going to be in the seated position. We're going to start off first with the deadlifts. So we already did one deadlift exercise in the first superset. That was a Romanian deadlift to target the hamstrings. This is a sumo deadlift, and the difference here is that you take a very wide stance and you actually hold the weight in between your legs as opposed to over top of them or outside of your legs. This just targets slightly different muscles. So Kayden wanted to really target the posterior chain muscles and hit them in a couple different ranges of motion and a couple different variations. This is good because one targets the hamstrings despite it being a similar movement, and the other one targets a little more of the other muscles around the hip. This one will get also glutes, lower back, hamstrings, but it tends to have a little bit more of the inner thigh and outer thigh. Now we're supersetting that right with the seated overhead press, and he's doing these in the neutral position. So that means that the dumbbells are in a hammer grip where your palms are facing each other, as opposed to the classic grip where your elbows are out, and it resembles very much the last exercise that we did in the last superset, which is a floor press. So similar to what the second variation was, by doing a neutral grip, it actually makes it less likely to cause any sort of shoulder impingement if you do have a shoulder issue. I also find that this variation tends to get more triceps and a little bit less front shoulder activation. Just slightly. There's still going to be the two main targeted muscles, just slightly different variation and percentages of which one's working. All right, so just remember that that first set is always a warm-up set. So get ready for the first full-on working set coming up right now. All right, this is set 2. Here's Kayden doing those sumo deadlifts. Now, another cue that's very important to know is that you always want your feet in line with your knees. So if your knees are pointing outwards, you don't want your feet pointing forwards or completely sideways. You want them pointing wherever your knees are pointing. That's going to help keep everything on the knee tracking properly and not causing any sort of issues. Now you'll notice here he's doing the same thing, shifting the weight backwards, pushing his hips backwards, hinging at the hips, and his torso is about 45-degree angle. He's still squeezing his shoulder blades together and squeezing his armpit between his arm and his rib cage. That is all for stability. Now here he is seated. Now this is not a back supported version. He is sitting without back support. That forces the abs and the stabilizers to work a little bit more. It also allows the scapula to move a little bit more because it's not being a little bit restricted by leaning back on a support. So again, this is a shoulder exercise primarily. It also targets the triceps, and by doing it in a neutral grip, you're relieving some impingement that some people might have. If it becomes too hard, don't compensate with your lower back. Just cut the set early or take a quick little break and then try and get a few more reps in. Okay, the last set is coming up. Catch your breath and focus on some of the main things again. Now, usually by the third set, your muscles are a little tired, especially your smaller stabilizer muscles. So this is where form tends to not be as good. That means that you really have to focus on the right cues and the right form and what's more important. So the most important thing here is getting stability and bracing the abs. So if there's one thing that you're going to focus on, it's that. The next thing to focus on is the right muscles that are working. So we want to get a good range of motion, a full range of motion if possible, and you want to feel it in your hamstrings in this exercise. you'll also likely feel it around your legs in general and even your full body. All right, and this is the last set of your seated overhead press with the neutral grip. So the two most important things here to focus on is, again, bracing the abs and also pressing straight up to the ceiling. I don't want you leaning back and then using your lower back as almost like a plank to push off of. Also, if you think of going to the ceiling and accelerating, it actually activates all your fast twitch fibers as well and really helps with strength in terms of getting that weight up. That will help because it's your last set and you're probably a little bit tired by now. All right, so this is the last set of exercises, and we actually have 3 in a row. So instead of this being a superset, which is 2 exercises in a row, we're doing 3 exercises in a row, which makes it a circuit. The first exercise is a shoulder elevated single leg hip thrust. The second is lateral raises with a pause. And the third is a squat clock. So all 3 of these exercises are pretty advanced in terms of technicality. So what we're doing here is having our shoulders, our upper back on a bench. It doesn't have to be a bench. It can be anything that you can prop yourself onto, but a bench is usually more comfortable because it's very stable and at the same time it has a little bit of cushioning. And what you're going to do is use one leg to thrust your weight up. Now it's really easy to use your lower back and cheat, and we don't want that. So what you're going to do is still brace the abs by pretending someone's going to kick you in the stomach and you're going to brace. And while you're bracing, you drive your foot and your heel right down into the ground to raise your hips up. Now this lateral raise variation targets the shoulders. This is the traditional way, standing tall and raising your arms laterally all the way up to feel your shoulders, the lateral side of them, the outside of your shoulders. Now Kayden prefers to do this with a little bit of a forward hinge, and doing this helps him prevent himself from swaying back and using momentum with his lower back. But alternatively, you can also just stand tall, squeeze the glutes and the core together so you're completely straight up. That will stabilize it and also prevent some swaying, and then you can do your lateral raise as well. The pause at the top is always just to make sure that you're feeling that muscle squeeze isometrically and you're not just using momentum. So a pause is actually really hard in that exercise. Now this squat clock is great. It still allows you to focus on using your quad of your main leg, but by dynamically moving the other leg, it forces you to stabilize a little bit differently, so it'll use a few different muscles targeted differently. It's also a challenge on the abs because you're kicking your leg out while you're maintaining that position. So we're just essentially going around in a clock position, trying to hit all the hours, and that'll bring you to 12 reps. Coming up is your second set of this exercise and this circuit. The first set is always your warm-up. So this is your working set, and you're going to focus a lot more on getting the reps done and getting the right muscles working. So here again, Kayden is focusing on the glutes. Other parts of his legs will be working to stabilize as well as his core, but just don't fall back and use your lower back to help get you bigger range of motion. That's not what we want. We're not trying to use your lower back or hyperextend it. We're trying to keep a tight core and focus on getting the glutes. It's a hard exercise, even just doing body weight. Now we go right into the lateral raises. So once again, this is a shoulder focused exercise. It's pretty much an isolation exercise that targets just the lateral delts for the most part. Now don't forget, if you're feeling any sort of shoulder irritation or what we call a shoulder impingement at the top of the exercise, you can actually change your grip and it'll likely alleviate or relieve some of the issue or pain. So right now Kayden has a palms down grip, and what you can do is do a thumbs up grip. So point your thumbs upwards and doing the same movement. That generally helps the issue. If it doesn't, I would recommend skipping this exercise and reaching out to one of us at Clearcut Fitness for alternatives. Now for the last exercise in the circuit, the squat clock. Now this exercise is great for a couple of reasons. Not only does it promote balance and stability, but it also targets different parts of the leg muscles each rep because it's slightly changing the range of motion, slightly changing the positioning. So you're going to have different muscles activating at different percentages. It's still, however, going to target mostly the quads because this is the main muscle group worked in a squat. What you're doing is just squatting down and moving your legs around in a clock-like fashion, and you want to get about 12 reps, one for each hour position. There's one last set of all three exercises to go. I'm not going to talk much during this as I want you to just focus. You might actually be a little more tired because you've been using your muscles for a couple sets already. So I want you to focus on the movements and getting the right muscle groups instead of listening to me through this set.